In the franchise lows playlist today, we're up to Detroit. And for Detroit fans, they might feel like they're in it. Right now, Detroit fans are probably saying, you know what, this is probably the worst it's been. You may be young if you're thinking that. If you're my age or older and you're a Detroit fan, you will remember things were much, much worse than this. But let's go through it. So the Detroit Red Wings now, but they've been the Falcons and the Cougars. They were the Cougars 1926 through 1930. The Victoria Cougars moved to Detroit, kept that name, became the Falcons in 1930, kept that name through 1932, and then became the Detroit Red Wings that we all know and love. So looking for an ugly jersey, the closest I could get is this, which is their from the 75th anniversary of the NHL. NHL 75th year, they wore this. And I was never a huge fan of it, and yet when I saw it on, I think it was Ice Jerseys I got it from, I was like, you know what? Yeah, why not? So, yeah. For Detroit, right now it's going to feel like it's an all-time low. It's not, and it's not because it feels like it's a natural progression from success. So, most losses in the team's franchise history, Terry Sawchuk had 245. Sawchuk, of course, is in the Hall of Fame. Also had a lot of wins as a member of the Detroit Red Wings, and arguably the greatest goaltender of all time, according to people who watched him play, and I didn't, I'm too young. According to people who've watched him play, he was arguably the greatest goaltender in NHL history. So there's that. Now, for lost asset, I went with Marcel Dion. Marcel Dion plays into this. The longest drought from 1971 through 1977. 7 seasons without playoffs. Nobody wanted to play in Detroit. I've got a Hockey News magazine from the mid-1970s, which talks about how nobody wants to go to Detroit. So Dion gets traded to the Kings, and one of the players that gets traded back to Detroit basically had a reaction of, oh, hell no. And he wouldn't go. He wouldn't report. So just imagine you trade for a guy, and the guy's like, I'm just not going to report. I'm going to not go to that team because that's Detroit. Detroit, the city, was having a lot of problems. Detroit, the team, the franchise on the ice was a disaster. When Jimmy Devellano takes over, nobody wanted to be there. It is a remarkable turnaround the team had. But for me, Marcel Dion epitomizes how, and if you look at the all-time scoring leaders for Detroit, the all-time points per game leader is Marcel Dion in the career numbers for Detroit. He was great, and they just had to get rid of him. And it's just nobody wanted to be there. So he went to the LA Kings. They formed the Triple Crown line, and it was a tough time. So as bad as things might feel right now for Detroit, I don't feel like they're in a low. I feel like in the 70s and early 80s, they were in a low. Because they made the playoffs in 78, and then they missed again for, I think it was 5 years before they got into the playoffs. So it was over a decade of mediocre to bad play. And then they got this guy, Steve Yzerman, who was pretty good and eventually would lead them somewhere. Short-term coaches, Barry Smith coached the team for 5 games in 1999, had a record of 4-1, interim coaches and all. And then Duke Keats in 1927, 2-7-2 record. So I thought, you know, with the name Duke, sure, we got to throw Duke on the board. And yeah, Duke Keats gets up there, 2-7-2 in his record in 1927. So that's interesting, and that's during their initial beginnings in the NHL. Not in the Hall. So this is your top point producers in the team's history and top wins producer in net that are not in the Hall that have to be retired. And the interesting thing is, you have Zetterberg and Datsyuk. Now, Datsyuk is still an active player, but he likely never comes back to the NHL. These are the only 2 players in their top 10 scorers that are not Hall of Fame players. So the other 8 top 10 scorers in the all-time history of the Detroit Red Wings are all in the Hall of Fame. So if you want to argue Zetterberg and Datsyuk both into the Hall of Fame, consistency. You can just say, you know what? The other 8 are in there. We need to have these 2 guys in there, so our entire top 10 scorers in the team's history are all in the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame committee can go, that's a sound reason as any, so they're in. And then not in the Hall, top wins producer, Chris Osgood. I've talked about Chris Osgood. There's video on the channel on Chris Osgood. I put him in my Hall of Fame. I don't think he ever goes to the NHL Hall of Fame. Do I think he belongs there? Yeah, probably. And I would go based on the last time he won the Stanley Cup and on his role with that team. I thought Osgood belonged in the Hall, but I sort of understand why he's not there, that he didn't have dominant seasons and he wasn't a Vezina goaltender. So I understand, but I'm going to go ahead and disagree with the idea that he's not a Hall of Famer. But that's in my eyes, and I know people are going to disagree with me on that as well. Year one for this franchise was not fantastic, and year one for most franchises isn't fantastic. 1926-27, they had 12 wins, 28 losses, and 4 ties. They had 28 points. Year 11, 1936-37, a much better record of 25-14-9 for 59 points. They won the Stanley Cup that year and the year before as well. So they start out as a true expansion team, not a great franchise, as far as their first couple of years. But before too long, they're winning Stanley Cups. And they won a number of Stanley Cups right up till 1955. I think it was 7. And then it went cold until the 90s. And of course, right in between that, you have this drought of 7 years, which was about as cold as it gets with Detroit. Now, when we look at their lowest points percentage against any one team, Montreal crops up at a .437 winning percentage. Goals for per game, their lowest is against Montreal, 2.55. Not a team from the 90s expansion and beyond. That kind of surprises me just a little bit. Now, the Ottawa Senators, they have a lower goals for per game, but that was the original Ottawa Senators, not the current Ottawa Senators, who were listed separately. So, I almost had Senators, and I went, wait a minute, this is the original Senators. Goals against per game against Philadelphia, they allow 3.52 goals per game. So, Philadelphia scores the most against them, and they score the least against Montreal. So, kind of nice to see that on the board. And, of course, for Detroit, one thing that I think is kind of a low point is they're not in the same division as Chicago anymore. I'm going to miss that rivalry, doing that video this morning on their 2013 series. And I kind of miss that rivalry of Chicago and Detroit. I understand why they're in the East. I do, but it's still, I miss that rivalry. Now, when we get into lowest points per games played, and again, it's a minimum of 100 games. Maxim Kuznetsov, .077. Kind of surprises me he's the lowest. And again, it's minimum of 100 games played. Jerry Odrowski, .087. If you don't recognize all these names, I don't blame you. Benny Voigt. Anybody? Hands up? No? All right, yeah, I get it. .092. Scotty Bowman, .093. That kind of surprised me a little bit, seeing Scotty Bowman's name there. And Walter Buswell, .093. So nobody of the recent Red Wings other than Kuznetsov. And by recent, I mean, within the last century. It just feels like most of these players are from ages and ages and ages ago. Lowest save percentage, minimum of 50 games played, and this is where I have a great sadness. Corrado Mikolev, .856. Loved the guy. I loved the name. That's why the name's on the board too, Corrado Mikolev. I thought it was a great name, and I liked the name Greg Stefan too, but neither goaltender was fantastic for a Detroit team that wasn't fantastic either. So that number also will reflect just how poor Detroit's defense was during that period. Gilles Gilbert, .858 was his save percentage as a Red Wing. I have a hockey card of Gilles Gilbert with the Wings, and he looks like his save percentage was .858, and he was disgusted by it. Not because he's disgusted with his own play, likely the team he's on, and thinking, how did I get here after Boston? Greg Stefan, .868, and Rogie Vachon had an .868 save percentage in Detroit as well. And Jim Rutherford, I threw the fifth goalie on there because Jim Rutherford was fifth from the bottom with an .876 save percentage, and Rutherford got to see some of this ugliness firsthand as well. So there's some interesting names on here that you have Jim Rutherford, a general manager of some stature, and you have Scotty Bowman, arguably the greatest coach of all time, and they're both on the board on this Lowe's video for the Detroit Red Wings. Kind of odd. Goalie with the best name again, Corrado Mikolev I have up there, and Dolly Dolson. Now I saw Dolly Dolson, and for some reason I was thinking, it's sort of like somebody's writing a comic book or they're writing a story, and they go, hey, so here's, what do you think? And they go, your character's name is Jimmy Olsen. There's a character in Superman called Jimmy Olsen. Yeah, no, that's a typo. I meant Dolly Dolson. And that's all I thought of. And this might just be sleep deprivation talking, but that's all I thought of when I saw that name was. That's something somebody would call Jimmy Olsen, who's trying to hide the name, Dolly Dolson. And yeah, there are some fun names when you look through their history, but I went with that one, and of course, Corrado Mikolev. But Hasek's a good one, and Mrazek's a good one. There's been a lot of good names. And, for Detroit, again, right now it may feel like it's low because they're in this rebuild. But the one thing Detroit has going for them right now, they have the manager with Steve Yzerman, and they're not a team that everybody around the league is going to be saying, we don't want to go there. And they definitely had that air about them in the 70s and early 80s that nobody wanted to end it. That was where you went to wind down your career, I guess, or just, just sit there for a while waiting to get your ticket out. It was a rough time, but of course, eventually things turned around. Jimmy Devellano gets in there, Ken Holland gets in there, and they bring back the kind of success that they had in the 50s. So there you go. The lows of the Detroit Red Wings, a team that's had its share of victories over the last 25 years, and now they're just suffering from what happens when your team is really good for a long time. It usually means you have less prospects, and you're trading away your future for your present a little bit too much, maybe, and so you go through this downbeat. But again, it doesn't feel like the 70s. It doesn't feel like what's described of what happened in the 70s and early 80s. When I came into watching hockey in the early 80s, yeah, the Red Wings were pretty bad. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support and for watching during this time. And hey, I will talk to you again soon.